And now, for your listening entertainment and thought provocation, perhaps, we have some more of a deep dive into Bakunin's God and the State. We're going further down that rabbit hole, and I've got a quote of his from that very same work. So he said, "Such are the absurd tales that are told and the monstrous doctrines that are taught in the full light of the 19th century in all the public schools of Europe at the express command of the government. They call this civilizing the people. Is it not plain that all these governments are systematic poisoners, interested stupefiers of the masses?" And Bakunin continues. He says, "I have wandered from my subject because anger gets hold of me whenever I think of the base and criminal means which they employ to keep the nations in perpetual slavery, undoubtedly that they may be the better able to fleece them. Of what consequence are the crimes of all the tropmans of the world compared with this crime of treason against humanity committed daily in broad day over the whole surface of the civilized world by those who dare call themselves the guardians and the fathers of the people?" End quote. So, wow, quite a series of sentences, and there's a lot to really go over with that. And you can do that yourself, of course. Make of those sentences what you will. But I do have to mention that after reading that, I had to Wikipedia the reference to Tropman, Tropmann, and sure enough, his name came up. Jean Baptiste Tropman was a French spree killer who, between August 24th and September 19th, 1869, murdered 8 members of the Kink family, including 6 children aged between 2 and 16 years old, in order to gain access to their money. He was caught in 1869 while attempting to flee the country. So I know how some people would react to this. They would see Bakunin as sort of trivializing this murder and all that kind of stuff, especially nowadays. People are more hyper vigilant of the trivialization of individual misbehaviors and crimes. Like, you're not supposed to compare and contrast them, and I get that. But at the end of the day, I understand why Bakunin did this comparison. uh, Really, it was just a classic play on the contrast between emperors and pirates. The fact that we call some people pirates when they steal, but other people, if they steal, we call them emperors or great leaders or some such thing, kings. All sorts of things. Even though they might engage in very similar behavior to some sort of miscreants. And sure enough, look at what authority has in fact, not just in some radical theory, not just me being, like a poser radical or anything like that, but look at what authority has in fact normalized down the ages through to the present day. So we've seen continued military occupations, excessive controls, artificially forced dependence on banks and corporations, subversion of revolutionary governments, backing of revolutionary governments, subversion of terrorist movements and dictators, backing of terrorist movements and dictators, protection of wealth, the confiscation of wealth, bandit laws, indignities and brutalities exercised upon the throngs of laborers, the degrading of the citizens of the civilized world, the extermination of competitive armed bands of pirates, whether it be continuing cruelties, the vivisections, impalings, and tortures and atrocious cruelties, insurrections, revolts, revolutions, foreign wars, invasions, the burning of towns and cities, the raping, the rapine, the pillage, whether it be all this or something else entirely, much of the current of the bourgeois press that percolates through the soul of the whole civilized world teaches us practically in its entirety the belief that some of these people were the most merciful and the best citizens that the earth could furnish, and we could surely mostly keep to their wise ways and grow ever wiser still. You know, like you look at all these lessons of history and see piles and piles of dead bodies and otherwise things going wrong, and you're supposed to like be really impressed by it all. um and here's a fun fact: those bulletproof fortifications around tellers and banks, those are known as bandit barriers in commercial banking slang. It's kind of a fun little fact, not really irrelevant to the points that I've made, but also not totally relevant. Um, so really, the point I'm making here is that Bakunin, once again, is not totally wrong. I mean, if you strip away the whole anarchist label that he admittedly chose to assign to himself, you'll find that you know he actually did make a lot of valid points, and I don't think his comparison was really all that out of line. And it was definitely something relevant to his time. Obviously, we don't really know who Tropman is nowadays, and in fact, I'm surprised they actually had a Wikipedia article on him. But I guess once he was a spree killer. I said free killer instead of spree because I looked at the word French. But anyway, he was a French spree killer. He was newsworthy. But oddly enough, it reminds me that a lot of these same problems were around back then. Even before we had all these mass shootings and whatnot, you still had crime waves back then, and you still had wars and dictators and a bunch of propaganda way back in the, I guess, the 1800s and before then, of course. I mean, go ahead and watch the Netflix series about the Medici family, and you'll see some of the same types of patterns in human behavior in that show. I mean, obviously, it's a fictionalized series. There are definitely things that happen in that show that you know didn't really happen the way that they say, and there are some composite characters and whatnot. But overall, I think the message that you could get is that these were actually human beings, and that a lot of the things that they experienced um, have echoes that go into the modern world as well. And if you look back at a lot of these uh, historical patterns, you'll see how little we have actually learned, I guess. And, as the saying goes, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I think that's really something that Bakunin was getting at. And, you know, I won't say that I agree with everything Bakunin said or anything like that, but once again, I can't say I disagree with what he said here. So I'm still waiting for some point in this book where I'm just going to say, God damn it, Bakunin, I disagree with you totally. You're totally wrong. But it just hasn't happened yet. I'm sorry, folks. I mean, uh, we'll look for that point, though. I'm going to be honest when it happens. If I'm going to have a huge disagreement with him, it'll actually be an interesting development. But so far, I'm sounding a bit like a Bakunin fanboy. I'm sorry. But really, that's all I've got to say about it for now. And you just have yourself a holly jolly little Christmas time.